What if I told you the money you want is not missing? It is simply waiting for you to claim it at the level of identity you choose today. This is not motivation. This is instruction. Money never follows wishful thinking. It follows consciousness. In this video, you will uncover a wealth principle that works from the inside out. If you are ready to stop chasing income and start attracting opportunity with certainty, focus, and inner command, what you are about to learn can shift your financial direction. Permanently stay with me and apply this with precision to see rapid change. The world does not move in response to exhaustion, sacrifice, or endless effort alone. It moves in response to identity. Long before money ever appears in your bank account, it appears in your self-concept. The outer world is not a judge of how hard you try. It is a mirror of who you believe you are. This is why two people can work with the same intensity, in the same field, with the same opportunities, yet produce radically different financial outcomes. The difference is not effort. The difference is identity. From the moment you wake up each day, you unconsciously vote for the version of yourself you believe you are. Your decisions, habits, boundaries, expectations, and tolerance for discomfort all flow from that silent self-image. Someone who sees themselves as struggling will unconsciously choose struggle-based outcomes. Someone who sees themselves as valuable will naturally select higher-level opportunities without forcing them. Money does not chase behavior, it aligns with self-definition. This is where most people distort the process. They attempt to use effort to override identity. They push harder, work longer, hustle relentlessly, but deep inside they still see themselves as behind, undeserving, or incomplete. That internal contradiction creates financial friction. Effort without identity alignment produces fatigue. Identity without effort produces momentum. When the two are aligned, money moves with speed. Your self-concept acts as a thermostat. No matter how much money you temporarily earn above it, you will unconsciously regulate yourself back down if your inner identity has not expanded to match the new level. This is why sudden windfalls often disappear just as quickly as they appear. The individual did not become the person who permanently operates at that level. Wealth cannot stabilize in a consciousness that does not recognize it as normal. To change income, you must first change what feels normal to you, not what feels exciting, not what feels possible, what feels natural. When success feels natural instead of surprising, money stays. When wealth feels ordinary instead of extraordinary, it multiplies. Normal is not defined by circumstances. It is defined by repeated inner acceptance. Identity speaks louder than affirmations. You can repeat prosperity statements all day, but if your daily decisions are rooted in fear, scarcity, or self-doubt, the subconscious mind will always follow behavior over words. What you tolerate financially reveals your true self-concept more honestly than anything you say. The amounts you accept, the delays you excuse, the undervaluation you permit, these are silent declarations of who you believe you are. When identity upgrades, behavior upgrades automatically. You begin to think differently, choose differently, respond differently. You stop negotiating with limitations. You stop shrinking your standards to accommodate discomfort. You stop seeking permission to receive more. This internal shift does not need outside validation to activate. It is self-authorizing. The outer world has no creative authority of its own. It rearranges itself around the dominant internal image, being consistently projected. This is why people who suddenly decide who they are, without waiting for proof, often see rapid changes that defy logic. Their environment scrambles to confirm the new identity because reality always seeks congruence. This is also why visualization alone does not work when it is treated as fantasy instead of identity rehearsal. Imagining wealth while still identifying as struggling creates internal conflict. But rehearsing life from the position of the person who already operates at that level trains the subconscious to accept it as standard. Once accepted, the external world begins searching for ways to comply. Effort feels heavy when it is used to compensate for identity gaps. It feels light when it flows from identity alignment. The same actions can feel exhausting or effortless, depending on who you believe you are when you take them. The wealthy do not work harder than everyone else. They think differently while working. Their self-concept removes resistance before action even begins. Your income ceiling will always match the ceiling of your self-image. You cannot sustainably earn beyond who you believe yourself to be. If you see yourself as someone who barely gets by, you will always find reasons that confirm just enough struggle to remain familiar. If you see yourself as someone who expects abundance, you will begin to notice opportunities you previously walked past without recognition. The shift does not require force. It requires authority. Authority is not dominance over others. It is certainty within yourself. When your inner world speaks with certainty, the outer world listens. Doubt weakens the signal. Identity strengthens it. Money responds automatically to conviction. If your identity says, "It is normal for me to prosper," the world adjusts to match that stance. If your identity says, "I must fight to survive," the world complies with that instruction as well. The world never argues with your self-concept. It only obeys it. The moment you stop trying to earn worth and start operating from worth, everything accelerates. You stop over-explaining. You stop discounting yourself. You stop chasing validation through overwork. You choose with clarity. You hold standards without guilt. You move with internal permission instead of external approval. This is why inner elevation produces outer acceleration. As your inner image rises, your expectations rise with it. As expectations rise, tolerance for limitation dissolves. When tolerance dissolves, behavior shifts. When behavior shifts, results have no choice but to follow. Income is not the cause, it is the receipt. The transaction happened internally long before the numbers changed. When the identity is upgraded first, money simply arrives to formalize what has already been accepted within. You were never meant to beg life for results through exhaustion. You were meant to claim them through alignment. The moment you decide who you are financially, with clarity and without negotiation, the world begins its quiet, mechanical obedience to that decision. The mirror adjusts. The numbers follow. The shift completes itself naturally. Stop waiting for proof, because proof has never been the starting point of creation. Proof has always been the echo. The world does not move first. You do. The moment you decide to wait for visible confirmation before changing who you are inside, you surrender your creative power to circumstance. And circumstance has no obligation to favor hesitation. The law is simple. Assumption precedes experience. The internal posture you occupy today is the only reality you will meet tomorrow. When you move internally as the person who already has something profound occurs, your walk changes. Your decisions sharpen. Your tolerance for delay weakens. Your standards rise without effort. You stop asking for permission from outcomes and start issuing instruction through expectation. The environment does not argue with certainty, it reorganizes around it. This is not force. This is alignment. Life responds fastest to a mind that has already settled on its destination. Most people secretly use the world as their authority. They say, "When I see it, I'll believe it." But this places the inner world in lifelong submission to outer conditions. And outer conditions are always late. By the time evidence shows up, your inner position is already outdated. The correct order is always inward command first, external confirmation second. The world is a delayed mirror, not a leader. Assumption is the engine of transformation because it bypasses struggle. Struggle implies distance. Assumption eliminates distance. When you assume something to be true, you stop seeking it. Seeking implies absence. Assumption implies presence. And presence is the only state the subconscious recognizes as real. It does not compute future tense. It responds only to the now. This is why pretending never works. But assuming does. Pretending feels false. Assuming feels settled. When you internally occupy the financial position you desire, you stop asking, "Will this work?" and begin asking, "How do I move today as the person for whom this is normal?" And that question alters behavior instantly. You invest differently. You speak differently. You take risks differently. You say no more often. You tolerate less chaos. You think in larger time horizons. These are not personality changes. These are identity confirmations. Waiting is resistance dressed as caution. It feels responsible, but it is rooted in fear. Fear of disappointment. Fear of being wrong. Fear of looking foolish. But the cost of waiting is always heavier than the cost of trusting your assumption. Waiting keeps you anchored to yesterday, while demanding tomorrow deliver you something new. That equation never balances. You cannot remain internally loyal to an old identity and expect a new reality to recognize you. The moment you assume, you cross an invisible threshold. You stop knocking on doors and begin walking through rooms. You stop begging opportunity and start selecting it. You are no longer reacting, you are positioning. And position is power. The environment does not respond to desire, it responds to posture. A dominant inner posture produces dominant results. There will be moments where nothing seems to change. This is where most people abandon the assumption and announce that it didn't work. But what they actually abandoned was their new identity at the moment it was being installed. The world must first dismantle your former conditions before it can deliver new ones. The old scaffolding must fall. The silence between decision and confirmation is not emptiness. It is reorganization. When you hold the assumption steady during that phase, you demonstrate authority over appearances. You prove that your inner position is not negotiable. That is when the shift accelerates. Not when you feel excited. Not when you feel hopeful, but when you feel anchored, calm, settled, unimpressed by delay. That emotional neutrality is not indifference, it is mastery. You are no longer chasing the outcome because you have already claimed the status. Assumption is not fantasy. Fantasy escapes the present. Assumption commands it. When you assume wealth, you do not imagine money falling from the sky. You imagine yourself operating at the level where money moves naturally through your decisions, your influence, your value, your leverage. The subconscious then begins to orchestrate perceptions, impulses, conversations, and timing that align with that internal order. And it does this quietly, without drama, without announcement. You will notice that opportunities begin to appear where none existed before. But in truth, they were always there. You simply lacked the perceptual bandwidth to recognize them. Identity determines what you can see. Change the identity and the field of options expands instantly. What once looked impossible now looks inevitable. Assume first, receive second. That sequence is unbreakable. You cannot bully the world into rewarding a version of you that you have not yet become. Results obey identity, not effort. Effort without inner alignment breeds exhaustion. Inner alignment without strain breeds momentum. The wealth you seek does not require permission from markets, people, timing, or luck. It requires internal authorization. The moment you grant that authorization through assumption, everything downstream begins to reorganize. Quietly at first, then rapidly, then unmistakably. And one day you will realize the break never came from the outside. It came from the moment you stopped waiting and took your place as the one who already has. Emotion is not something you add as an afterthought. It is the central force that activates everything. Thought may design the blueprint, but feeling is the power source that turns the design into movement. Without feeling, desire remains intellectual. With feeling, desire becomes directive. The subconscious does not respond to what you say you want. It responds to what you feel is already true. The moment your desire is experienced internally as a present fact rather than a distant hope, a fundamental shift takes place. The mind stops preparing and starts executing. Life stops resisting and starts reorganizing. Most people attempt to manifest from a state of yearning. They imagine change while emotionally remaining in lack. This creates internal contradiction. The words reach forward, but the emotions stay anchored in absence. The subconscious always sides with the dominant emotional state, not with verbal affirmation. If the emotional atmosphere is still saturated with doubt, waiting, or insecurity, the subconscious receives the message that the desired condition is not yet real. And whatever is not yet real internally cannot become stable externally. Feeling is the language the subconscious understands without translation. It does not analyze, it does not question, it accepts and reproduces. When you generate the emotional signature of wealth, security, freedom, or success, the subconscious receives it as a present instruction, not a future request. This is why emotional alignment is not optional, it is structural. Just as electricity requires both voltage and current, manifestation requires both intention and feeling. Intention without feeling is static. Feeling without clarity is chaotic. When they unite, momentum becomes unavoidable. There is a critical difference between imagining something you want and feeling yourself to be the person who already has it. One is projection, the other is embodiment. Projection looks outward and waits. Embodiment looks inward and commands. The subconscious only responds to embodiment. When you feel wealthy, you begin to think, choose, tolerate, risk, and move like someone who is wealthy. These behaviors are not forced. They emerge naturally as a byproduct of identity. And because the outer world mirrors inner identity with precision, results begin to appear without struggle. Emotion also compresses time. What logic predicts will take years often unfolds rapidly. When feeling collapses the psychological distance between now and the desired outcome. When your nervous system no longer treats success as unfamiliar, life no longer delays it for your adjustment. Familiarity accelerates arrival. This is why sudden breakthroughs happen after internal shifts that seem invisible to others. The shift was emotional, and emotion always moves faster than logic. Feeling the desire as fact is not pretending, it is conditioning. Just as the brain can be trained to respond automatically to threat or stress, it can be trained to respond automatically to opportunity and abundance. Repetition of feeling builds neural expectation. Eventually, wealth stops feeling special and starts feeling normal. At that point, receiving becomes natural instead of overwhelming. Many people block success not because they cannot imagine it, but because their nervous system is unprepared to host it. Emotional conditioning solves that problem at the root. It is also important to understand that emotion is not forced excitement. Forced excitement creates tension, and tension signals effort. The subconscious reads effort as resistance. True activation feeling is calm, settled, and certain. It is the quiet confidence of inevitability, not the loud energy of wishful thinking. It is the feeling of course, rather than I hope. When the feeling is correct, you are not chasing signs, you are recognizing confirmations. When desire is felt as fantasy, it remains distant. When it is felt as fact, it becomes operational. The difference is subtle but decisive. Fantasy carries emotional fragility. It is easily disrupted by doubt, comparison, or delay. Fact carries emotional stability. It does not argue with circumstances. It stands independent of them. This is why the inner feeling must be cultivated daily. The outer world is fed by repetition, not by single bursts of belief. You do not generate feeling by forcing positivity. You generate it by entering the scenario mentally, as if it is happening now. You move through the scene as the person who already succeeded. You notice what you would notice. You respond as you would respond. You relax into what would be familiar. The body follows the mind, and the emotion follows the body. Soon the feeling no longer feels created. It feels remembered. That is when the subconscious locks in. Once the subconscious accepts something as real, it no longer seeks permission from circumstances. It begins filtering perception differently. Opportunities that were once invisible become obvious. Conversations that once seemed irrelevant suddenly hold value. Decisions that once felt risky now feel obvious. This is not coincidence, it is alignment. The world has not changed, you have. And because you have changed, you now move through a different version of the same reality. The emotional state you sustain determines not only what you receive, but how you receive it. If abundance still feels unsafe, it will arrive in unstable ways and leave quickly. If it feels natural and secure, it arrives in stable forms and stays. This is why emotional mastery is superior to tactical strategy. Tactics can produce money once. Emotional alignment produces money repeatedly. What you repeatedly feel, you repeatedly confirm. Feeling is the mold, circumstance is the cast. You cannot repeatedly feel defeated and expect victorious outcomes. You cannot repeatedly feel empowered and remain stuck. The subconscious does not allow long-term contradiction between inner state and outer experience. One will eventually override the other, and the inner state always wins. When desire is felt as fact, behavior shifts without force. The tone of your voice changes. The pace of your decisions changes. The quality of your standards changes. You stop negotiating with limitation. You stop asking if it is possible and start deciding how it will arrive. This is how emotion becomes power. Not by excitement, not by struggle, but by certainty. And once that certainty stabilizes, life responds with precision, not always instantly, but always accurately. The delay is never punishment, it is calibration. It allows the new identity to settle so the results can stay. When the feeling is steady, the outcome becomes inevitable. Not because you demanded it, but because you became the version of yourself that no longer lives without it. Imagination is not a passive daydream. It is an active creative force that quietly shapes outcomes long before they appear in physical form. What you consistently imagine with clarity and feeling becomes a set of instructions to the deeper mind, and that mind does not question, it executes. When you see yourself succeeding with emotional realism, you are not escaping reality, you are selecting it. The inner world is the blueprint, and the outer world is only the construction site responding to that design. Most people misunderstand visualization because they treat it like wishful thinking. They picture success briefly, then return to doubt, worry, and habit. That weak repetition never gains authority. True visualization is immersive. It involves sight, sound, texture, emotion, and identity. You do not imagine watching yourself succeed. You imagine being the one who has succeeded. You feel the weight of the achievement in your body. You sense the calm certainty that replaces fear. When imagination is done at this level, the subconscious accepts it as familiar, and whatever feels familiar becomes normal to express. Every result in your life began as an internal assumption before it ever became a circumstance. Long before money appeared or vanished, you rehearsed a story about success, struggle, safety, or limitation. These internal rehearsals hardened into patterns. That is why change feels difficult. Not because it is impossible, but because the mind is loyal to what it repeatedly accepts as true. When you introduce a new inner image and persist with it, you are not fighting reality. You are slowly replacing the instruction set that reality follows. The reason sensory detail matters is because the subconscious does not respond to words alone. It responds to experience. If you simply say, "I am wealthy," while emotionally feeling uncertain, the emotional signal overrides the statement. But if you imagine checking your account balance and feel the calm assurance of abundance, if you feel the relaxed breathing that comes with security, if you sense the normality of ease, that emotional realism carries authority. The mind cannot distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a physically lived one. It stores both as memory, and memory becomes expectation. Expectation becomes behavior. Behavior shapes outcome. This is why repetition is decisive. One visualization session does not reprogram a lifetime of patterns, but consistent inner rehearsal builds a new default state. At first it may feel artificial. Then it becomes familiar. Eventually it becomes automatic. When something becomes automatic, it no longer requires motivation or force. You begin making choices from the identity of the person who already expects success. You speak differently. You tolerate less limitation. You recognize opportunity faster. You stop sabotaging what aligns with your new self-image. All of that flows naturally when the inner image is stable. The invisible shift always precedes the visible result. The world does not change first and then convince the mind. The mind changes first and then the world confirms it. This is why impatient people quit. They abandon the image when the environment takes time to reorganize. But the delay is not resistance, It is transition. Old assumptions are dissolving. Old channels are collapsing. New pathways are forming. If you interrupt the process by doubting, you simply reinforce the former structure. When you rehearse success internally, do not exaggerate or strain. Calm confidence is far more powerful than emotional desperation. Think of how natural breathing feels, effortless, unforced. That is the tone your inner state must carry. You are not trying to become wealthy, you are allowing wealth to feel normal. You are not chasing opportunity, you are assuming alignment with it. The body responds immediately to what feels natural, and life follows the body's lead. It is also essential that imagination be paired with acceptance rather than conflict. If you visualize while secretly arguing with yourself, the conflict weakens the signal. But when you practice gentle consistency, without emotional tension, the new assumption settles into place. You are not begging reality to change. You are instructing your own consciousness to take a different position. And when consciousness shifts position, the external scene must move accordingly. This process works because the deeper mind governs perception, choice, risk tolerance, persistence, creativity, and emotional regulation. When your inner picture upgrades, all of these functions recalibrate without force. You begin to notice openings you once overlooked. You respond to challenges with steadiness instead of panic. You carry yourself with quiet authority rather than hesitation. These are not cosmetic changes. They are mechanical shifts in how life operates through you. Wealth at its core is not money. It is permission. It is the internal decision that ease, growth, and expansion are allowed. Visualization is how that permission becomes embodied. It removes the psychological friction that sabotages receiving. When you feel at home with success internally, you stop unconsciously pushing it away externally. The real power of imagination is identity transfer. You are not imagining money alone. You are becoming the version of yourself who naturally aligns with it. And once that version is familiar, effort decreases while results increase. The nervous system stops reacting to growth as a threat. The mind stops categorizing opportunity as unrealistic. The body stops tightening around risk. When that happens, the flow you once tried to force begins to move on its own. Nothing in this process depends on luck. It depends on disciplined inner direction. What you repeatedly experience within becomes what you repeatedly experience without. That is not philosophy. That is causal law. When your inner world carries the structure of success, the external world must eventually mirror it. And when the mirror changes, it will not feel miraculous. It will feel inevitable. Time lag is not a contradiction of your outcome. It is evidence that the outcome is reorganizing reality at levels you cannot yet see. When visible results pause, most people retreat into doubt. But doubt is the only thing that can interrupt momentum. Delay is not denial. Delay is alignment catching up with assumption. The distance between your inner decision and its outer confirmation is simply the time required for old conditions to dissolve and new ones to take their place. What appears as stagnation is often transformation in progress. Most people abandon their vision precisely because the old world still looks intact. Bills still arrive. Circumstances still echo past choices. The environment appears unchanged. But this is the exact moment when persistence becomes decisive. The outer world always lags behind inner movement. Reality is reflective, not instantaneous. If you react emotionally to what you see during this interim phase, you attempt to rebuild what is already collapsing. Holding steady is not passive, it is the most active form of power there is. Persistence is not clenched effort. It is calm loyalty to the inner conclusion you have already accepted as true. It is waking up each day without negotiating with doubt. It is moving, speaking, planning, and perceiving from the standpoint that the result already exists. The mind does not need constant struggle. It needs consistent direction. Every time you return to certainty instead of panic, you strengthen the gravitational pull of your outcome. The delay also serves a psychological purpose. It purifies your belief. At first, desire carries excitement. Then excitement fades. External silence follows. This is where belief either matures into conviction or withers into abandonment. Anyone can feel powerful when evidence appears quickly. True inner authority is proven when nothing appears to move and you remain unmoved. When you persist without reassurance, you become anchored in identity instead of circumstance. Power is proven when the old world tests your allegiance to the new one. The previous financial narrative does not disappear instantly. It resurfaces to check whether you truly shifted or merely entertained an idea. The moment you remain loyal to your inner assumption despite contrary evidence, you outgrow the old pattern. The delay is not just about producing money, it is about producing the person who can hold it without collapse. Many people confuse persistence with force. They try to push outcomes into existence with anxiety disguised as discipline. True persistence is relaxed dominance. It is knowing without needing to argue with the world. It is continuing forward motion without emotional spikes. When persistence is clean, it contains no desperation. It is simply a steady declaration through behavior and self-concept that the outcome is inevitable. Every major result emerges through compression. Energy builds beneath the surface before it breaks through visibly. Just as pressure forms a diamond, continuity forms manifestation. The longer you remain steady, the more momentum accumulates beneath awareness. What looks like waiting is actually strengthening. What looks like repetition is reinforcement. Nothing is wasted when consciousness is aligned. During this phase, impatience becomes the only enemy. Impatience leaks authority. It signals internal negotiation. The moment you check repeatedly for proof, you imply uncertainty. This does not destroy the process, but it slows its expression. Certainty accelerates. Calm expectation is the signature of eventual dominance. Those who master this phase become unrecognizable to their former limits. Persistence means refusing to emotionally fund the old identity. You no longer react with the same fear, the same panic, the same self-doubt. You may notice them arise, but you do not obey them. Each time you override the old reflex with the new assumption, you weaken the past and strengthen the future. The inner shift becomes irreversible. This is where most people unknowingly fail. They persist on good days and abandon themselves on difficult ones. Power is not built in comfort. It is built in continuity across uncertainty. When the mood drops, when progress seems slow, when others doubt, when the old world taunts you with familiarity, that is when persistence is forged into identity. At that point, success is no longer a goal, it becomes a consequence. You do not persist to convince the world. You persist to stabilize the version of yourself that already knows the outcome. Once that version stabilizes, the outer world has no alternative but to follow. Reality reorganizes around the most dominant self-concept present within you. When persistence becomes effortless, results become unavoidable. The final phase of delay often looks like contradiction. Sometimes circumstances worsen just before transition. This is not regression, it is displacement. Old structures resist collapse because they were once supported by attention. When the attention withdraws, instability appears before disappearance. Those who misinterpret this as failure retreat at the threshold of breakthrough. Those who persist walk straight through the door that fear tries to guard. Persistence is the refusal to demote your vision simply because timing is undefined. It is the quiet agreement with yourself that the outcome does not depend on emotional weather or external approval. Once that agreement becomes permanent, resistance dissolves. The world cannot resist the mind that no longer debates with itself. This is where manifestation stops being a technique and becomes a state of being. You no longer try to believe, you simply are. And when identity is consistent, reality has no choice but to mirror it. The waiting period ends not because you demanded it to, but because there is nothing left to contradict. Hoping scatters energy because it keeps the mind divided. When you hope, part of you wants the outcome, but another part doubts it, delays it, or places it somewhere in the future. That internal division weakens momentum. The subconscious does not respond to vague desire, it responds to certainty. Hope is a request. Decision is a command. The moment you decide, your energy stops leaking in multiple directions and begins moving with force toward a single outcome. A true decision is not emotional excitement. It is not wishful thinking. It is a settled inner conclusion that says, this is who I am now and this is the standard I accept. When that inner conclusion locks in, behavior changes automatically. You think differently. You speak differently. You tolerate less. You move with a quiet authority that does not need approval. The external world always reorganizes itself around identity-based decisions. Most people postpone decision because they want guarantees first. They want proof before commitment. But life does not operate that way. Proof follows commitment, not the other way around. When you decide your financial standard without negotiation, you stop adjusting your expectations to match fear, limitation, or past results. You establish a new baseline. From that moment forward, anything beneath that baseline feels unnatural, temporary, and unstable. Hesitation collapses when decision becomes identity. You no longer wake up questioning whether it will happen. You wake up asking how you will express it today. The pressure shifts from can I to how I. This alone changes your tone, your posture, your focus, and your perception. Opportunity becomes visible where before there was only distraction. Conversations take on a different weight. Choices sharpen. You stop drifting and start directing. Life respects clarity because clarity removes confusion from the field. Confusion creates friction. Clarity creates motion. When your inner world is undecided, the outer world mirrors that uncertainty through delays, mixed results, and inconsistency. When your inner world settles into a firm decision, the outer world begins to rearrange with surprising speed. Doors appear, resources align. People respond differently to you, not because they know your thoughts, but because they feel your certainty. Decision is not force. It is not struggle. It is alignment. When you decide, you are no longer asking the world to change for you. You are becoming the version of yourself that no longer fits the old conditions. The old financial ceiling starts to feel foreign. You outgrow it internally before you outgrow it externally. That internal shift is what triggers visible change. Many people mistake decision for pressure. They think deciding means stressing, controlling, or micromanaging every detail. That is not decision. That is fear disguised as effort. True decision is calm. It is quiet. It does not require constant reformation because it is embedded. You know when you have truly decided because the argument ends inside you. The debate stops. You are no longer negotiating with doubt. Once decision is made, energy stops leaking into hypothetical scenarios of failure. The mind stops rehearsing limitations. Instead, it begins organizing around execution, optimization, and direction. You conserve enormous amounts of mental energy when you stop revisiting the same question every day. That reclaimed energy becomes momentum. Your financial standard is not determined by how hard you work. It is determined by what you believe is normal for you. When you decide a higher standard is normal, your actions rise to meet it naturally. You stop undercharging, you stop procrastinating, you stop shrinking in conversations about money. You no longer feel like you are trying to get more. You feel like you are enforcing what already belongs at your level. Hoping keeps you emotionally dependent on external conditions. Decision makes you internally sovereign. When you hope, your mood rises and falls with circumstances. When you decide, your mood stabilizes because it is anchored in identity, not outcomes. That emotional stability alone makes you more magnetic, more persuasive, and more effective in every financial interaction. Life moves around decision the way water moves around a fixed object. A leaf floats aimlessly. A stone redirects the current. When your inner world becomes solid through decision, circumstances begin to flow around you differently. You stop being pushed by trends, opinions, and setbacks. You become a directional force. This is why clarity is more powerful than effort. Millions of people work hard. Very few decide. Work without decision feels heavy. Decision turns work into expression. You are no longer forcing progress. You are allowing what you have already accepted internally to organize externally. The moment you remove negotiation from your financial standard, you remove the emotional roller coaster. You are no longer seesawing between confidence and doubt. You stop interpreting every delay as feedback about your worth. You continue moving because your identity no longer depends on immediate results. This is where speed is born. Speed does not come from rushing. It comes from removing internal resistance. Most resistance is simply undecided identity. Once the self-image locks in, movement becomes natural and steady. The right conversations happen at the right time. The right ideas surface when they are needed. Timing becomes precise because resistance is gone. Decision also simplifies your environment. Some people fall away. Some distractions lose their appeal. Some habits no longer fit. This is not loss, it is refinement. A higher standard demands a cleaner field. When you decide, you unconsciously eliminate what no longer matches your direction. Money moves through decision because money is directionally responsive. It flows where clarity leads it. It avoids confusion. It accelerates towards certainty. When you become certain of your financial identity, money no longer feels like something you chase. It becomes something that naturally circulates through your life as a reflection of your inner order. And the greatest shift happens when you realize that decision is always available to you now. You do not need permission. You do not need conditions to improve first. You do not need to wait for confidence to arrive. Confidence is the byproduct of decision, not the prerequisite. The moment you choose your standard without negotiating with fear, everything begins to reorganize quietly, steadily, and inevitably in your favor. Uncertainty fractures momentum. Every doubt divides your energy, slows your decisions, and stretches time into delay. When the mind hesitates, life hesitates with it. But when inner certainty becomes fixed, when you move with quiet, unshakable knowing, time begins to collapse around your intention. What once took years can shift in months. What once felt distant begins to draw near with speed and coordination that feels almost unreal. This is the power of spiritual confidence. It removes friction at the source. Spiritual confidence is not loud. It does not need to announce itself. It does not argue, justify, or seek validation. It moves silently, decisively, and without negotiation. Trying is effort mixed with doubt. Knowing is action without internal resistance. When you are trying, part of you is still preparing for failure. When you know, your nervous system relaxes into expectation. You stop bracing for disappointment and start moving as if success is simply the next logical step. That shift alone accelerates results. The outer world is extremely sensitive to your inner posture. People respond differently to certainty than they do to hope. Opportunities respond differently to decision than they do to hesitation. Money responds differently to calm authority than to anxious pursuit. When confidence becomes alignment rather than performance, everything moves faster because nothing inside you is pulling in the opposite direction. Speed in manifestation is not created through force. It is created through coherence. When your thoughts, emotions, beliefs, and identity all agree on a single outcome, reality has no conflict to reconcile. There are no mixed signals. There is no internal delay. The moment you stop asking, will this work? And start moving with, this is done, you remove the final barrier that stretches time. Most delays are not external obstacles. They are internal negotiations. People negotiate with fear. They negotiate with self-worth. They negotiate with old stories about what is possible for them. Spiritual confidence ends that negotiation. It establishes a non-debatable standard within you. When the standard is set, behavior changes automatically. You stop entertaining options that contradict your future. You stop tolerating conditions that mismatch your decision. And because your actions become cleaner, the feedback loop from life becomes faster. There is also a biological shift that occurs. The body reacts to uncertainty with tension, stress, and hyper-vigilance. This drains clarity and weakens intuition. Confidence, however, places the body into coherence. The nervous system moves out of survival and into command. From this state, perception sharpens. You notice opportunities faster. You speak with more impact. You take bolder action without forcing it. This alone compresses timelines because you no longer miss openings that once passed unnoticed. Another reason confidence accelerates results is because it alters your tolerance for lag. When you are unsure, you accept delay as normal. When you are certain, delay feels unnatural. And what feels unnatural to the mind is quickly corrected by behavior. You follow up faster. You decide quicker. You release faster. You pivot without emotional entanglement. Speed is not rushed energy. It is clean energy. Alignment is the key distinction. Arrogance is forced certainty used to mask insecurity. Alignment is certainty that requires no mask. Arrogance reacts. Alignment responds. Arrogance needs to be seen. Alignment simply moves. One repels, the other attracts. One disrupts flow, the other creates slipstreams. When your confidence comes from alignment, it magnetizes without resistance. People trust it. Circumstances cooperate with it. Outcomes form around it. When knowing replaces trying, your imagination also changes its function. Instead of imagining to escape current conditions, you imagine from the authority of one who already expects results. That expectation is not hopeful, it is familiar. And familiarity is the language the subconscious obeys. What feels familiar is allowed. What feels unfamiliar is delayed. Spiritual confidence makes your future feel normal in advance, and life reconfigures to match what the mind has already accepted. Time itself is not fixed. It stretches under indecision and contracts under conviction. Indecision creates branching possibilities that dilute energy. Conviction collapses those branches into a single path. When there is only one direction internally, movement externally becomes swift and efficient. Waste disappears, confusion clears, emotional turbulence settles, and speed emerges as a natural consequence of order. Confidence also restructures how you respond to external resistance. When you are unsure, resistance feels like rejection. When you are aligned, resistance feels like redirection. You do not stall, you adjust, you remain in motion, and uninterrupted motion compounds. Many people manifest slowly not because they lack power, but because they keep stopping to interpret every obstacle as a verdict. Confidence eliminates that pause. There is also a deeper law at work. Reality mirrors internal authority. When you claim authority within your own consciousness, the world treats your assumptions as instructions rather than requests. This is why leadership energy attracts resources faster than effort alone. It is not about dominating others. It is about no longer being divided within yourself. A unified mind moves mountains because it does not contradict itself. The acceleration you seek is not granted by chance. It is released by coherence. The moment your certainty becomes quiet, stable, and unquestioned, momentum becomes natural. You stop chasing. You stop proving, you stop testing, you start expecting. And expectation carries far more force than effort ever could. When confidence is rooted in alignment, it becomes untouchable by circumstances. It does not rise with winds or fall with setbacks. It holds steady. And steadiness is what allows momentum to build without collapse. Storms do not stop those who are anchored. Delays do not discourage those who have already decided. Speed belongs to the one who no longer debates their destination. This is why spiritual confidence creates material speed, not because it demands more from the world, but because it removes the brakes within you. Once the brakes are gone, motion is inevitable. And once motion is uninterrupted, arrival is only a matter of sequence, not possibility. Money is not something you chase, beg for, or wait on. It is something that moves in response to who you decide to be. The moment you stop seeing money as a reward for effort and start recognizing it as a response to inner authority, your entire financial dynamic begins to change. Authority is not loud. It is not aggressive. It is certainty. It is the quiet, unshakable knowing that what you claim internally has the right to express externally. When that knowing becomes stable, money no longer feels distant, unpredictable, or hard to reach. It starts responding to your state of being. Most people approach money from longing. They want it, hope for it, visualize it as something outside of themselves that must be earned. convinced, or fought for. Longing creates distance. It reinforces the idea that wealth is separate, scarce, and controlled by forces beyond the self. Leadership collapses that distance. Leadership says, "This is mine to direct." The difference between longing and command is the difference between wishing the door would open and realizing you have the key in your hand. Inner authority is the foundation of financial command. It is built through the decisions you make about who you are, what you deserve, and what you will no longer negotiate. Every time you decide from fear, you reinforce smallness. Every time you decide from certainty, you reinforce power. Money does not respond to words, affirmations, or surface-level confidence alone. It responds to the deeper assumption that sits beneath every thought. Am I the kind of person for whom financial flow is natural, or am I the kind of person who must struggle for it? External expectation is the visible expression of internal authority. When your expectations are low, your results reflect limitation. When your expectations are crystal clear and unapologetically elevated, reality reorganizes around those standards. This is not superstition, it is psychological and energetic positioning. People, opportunities, timing, and circumstances move differently around a person who expects success versus one who merely hopes for it. Command is expectation backed by identity, not desperation backed by desire. Leadership in wealth means you stop asking for permission to prosper. You no longer wait for validation, perfect timing, or external confirmation before stepping into your financial standard. You move as someone who already belongs in rooms where money circulates freely. This shift corrects your posture, your language, your decisions, and your tolerance for delay. You stop entertaining plans that only allow you to survive and begin selecting outcomes that reflect expansion. When inner authority aligns with external expectation, finances shift rapidly because resistance collapses. Resistance comes from contradiction. If your mind says you are powerful but your self-concept agrees you are struggling, the struggle wins. Alignment removes the conflict. The subconscious accepts leadership when it is consistent. Once accepted, it drives behavior automatically. You start noticing opportunities without forcing them. You take decisive action without panic. You invest with clarity instead of fear. You negotiate from confidence instead of scarcity. These micro shifts compound into macro results. Wealth responds to leadership because leadership is coherence. It is the synchronization of thought, belief, emotion, and action toward a unified standard. Longing is fragmented. It wants without believing. It dreams without deciding. It hopes without commanding. Coherence carries authority. When your internal world becomes ordered around abundance as normal, the external world complies with that order. Command is not domination over others. It is mastery over self. The person who commands money is first the person who commands attention, discipline, focus, and identity. They do not allow their mood to dictate their mission. They do not allow temporary conditions to rewrite permanent decisions. Their financial reality becomes stable because their inner position is stable. Speed enters when doubt exits. Doubt fractures momentum. Certainty compresses time. When you move from the assumption that you are meant to figure it out to the assumption that it is already unfolding in your favor, urgency shifts from anxiety to execution. You stop asking if it will work and begin moving as if it already is. Money is extraordinarily responsive to clarity. The clearer your standard, the faster the response. Vague goals produce slow movement. Precise identity produces rapid alignment. When you decide exactly how you live, how you earn, how you invest, and how you circulate value, reality mirrors that decisiveness. Leadership also changes how you relate to obstacles. You stop interpreting delays as rejection and start reading them as recalibration. You do not collapse at temporary contraction because authority does not disappear when conditions fluctuate. The inner position remains stable while the outer form reorganizes. Command is stabilized through repetition. Every day you awake and reassert your financial identity through assumption, decision, and expectation. You deepen the groove through which opportunity flows. Eventually, the idea of lack feels unnatural. Struggle feels outdated. Abundance stops feeling aspirational and starts feeling inevitable. You do not lead money by controlling the market. You lead money by controlling self-concept. When your self-concept upgrades, your standards upgrade. When your standards upgrade, your results follow. At the highest level, money is simply feedback. It reflects what you believe is possible for you, what you tolerate, and what you consistently decide. When you operate from command, the feedback changes swiftly. Opportunities widen, networks expand, income streams diversify, risk becomes calculated instead of terrifying. Wealth stops being a distant dream and becomes a moving system that you consciously direct. The shift is internal first, but its echo is always external. The moment you stop hoping and start leading is the moment money begins to respond differently to you. It is no longer something you wait for. It becomes something that moves when you move, expands when you expand, and multiplies when your inner authority remains non-negotiable. You were never meant to struggle for what you are designed to command. If you change the image you hold, the world has no option but to comply. The shift begins now within you.